how did you first become interested in the business of appraising art?
Actually, that was quite a fun discovery. I grew up in a family of museum administrators and professional artists, and I'd been going to museums ever since I was 14 because I started traveling in Europe with my father 3 or 4 or 5 times a year in Europe. And he'd be at work all day, and Rome would be mine, or Paris, or Beirut, or Cairo, or anywhere we were. So I went to lots of museums, saw lots of art, and of course, because that was sort of a family thing, I went in a different direction, of course.
Of course.
Uh, so I had finished up my PhD work. I went to the University of Florida, University of London, and University of Ghana for my PhD work. And I said to my wife, you know, most people live somewhere because that's where their job is, or that's where they grew up. And then 2 weeks out of the year, they go and find the place that they think is perfect. Let's go find our perfect place and get our lives together there. Well, after 4 months of traveling around the West and wilderness areas and all, we ended up quite intentionally in Colorado Springs. And I was hired to run an art gallery. And it wasn't long before I was asked to do an appraisal. Well, I had no idea what an appraisal was. And quite frankly, at that time, there really was no profession of personal property appraising. Oh, some dealers would write up a half-page, opinion or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I did everything I could think of, and I did the research into the artist's career, and I wrote up a report. And when I was through, I thought, this is pretty interesting. This is just what I've been doing in graduate school and love doing. I'm a writer. Here's a chance for writing. And the commentaries in my reports are quite a joy for me because I escort my reader to my conclusions. It's research, it's dealing with people. Maybe there's an opportunity for public speaking. Maybe there's an opportunity to publish some articles, etc. This is really cool. So I started training myself in all the mediums. I did all the mediums. I did all the different paints. I sculpted different woods. I worked in a foundry briefly. I went various places to learn from people. At the same time, I was running the art gallery. And
Wow.
that was in 1972. I started in 1979. I sold the frame shop and closed the gallery and went into art appraising full time. And it's been one of those careers that people say you're supposed to have. Do what you love and
Mm-hmm.
never feel like you're going to work in the morning. Well, here I am, 77 years of age, and I can't imagine not doing it, even though I have a really splendid partner at our office in Mexico City, who, when I no longer do, will be available to take over completely. So I got into it, sort of fell into it. I took a look, and there were 3 appraisal societies by 1984, but the regulations I'd written for myself were better than theirs. So I didn't join until I started doing court work and expert witness testimony. And then that gave me decades of really helping the profession develop through leadership, teaching valuation law at 4 universities, mentoring a lot of young appraisers, and becoming what within the industry, I'm proud to say, they started calling me the I forgot the term now, but they started calling me basically the top art appraiser in the country, which meant that I was doing something right.
Yes, definitely.
It's been a wonderful experience.
Oh, I can't imagine. It sounds like it was a career made for you specifically.
Dean of art appraisers, that was the term they used.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So how is it that you became so involved with Salvador Dali's work?
Well, again, that was one of those sort of falling into it things and recognizing an opportunity. In 1980, a woman from Anchorage brought me 3 Salvador Dali prints, big decorative prints, pencil signatures, and lots of documentation about what they were. The only problem was that because I developed myself as an expert in determining how prints had been made, because after all, I'd made prints in all the different ways possible, I looked at the prints and I looked at documents and they didn't match up. The documentation was misleading and it did not say what the prints were. So in my research for that appraisal, I called the gallery in Honolulu. And they said, if you got a problem, you better talk to the publisher. So I called the publisher in Paris. And the publisher said, if you got a problem, you better talk to my lawyer. So I called the lawyer, and the lawyer said, mind your own business. And I was hooked. I thought something's going on here. So I started checking with all my colleagues, checking with people in the print market, et cetera. And everybody said, stay away. It's a can of worms. It's very dangerous. Nobody knows anything. There are lots and lots of fakes. The mafia is involved. And the more answers like that I got, the more fascinated I was. And by 1983, I went to my secretary and I said, I think I've got the opportunity to become the man for Salvador Dali. I think there's a niche here because nobody else will touch it. And most appraisers just plain turn down Dali artworks because they're afraid of getting involved. And there I was. And now, all these years later, I have appraised over 85,000 Salvador Dali prints and a couple of thousand other Dali works, oil paintings, watercolors, drawings, and some sculptures.
Wow. So Dali is probably the most forged artist in the world, would you say?
I think you're right. I think you can say that. Of the 85,000 prints that I've examined, probably 60% of those were fakes.
Wow. That's amazing.
And I'm still the only one who can tell the difference. There are a couple people who say they can, but there are reasons why they should be avoided.
And usually the documents that people have to go with their prints are worthless.
Yeah, you're right. They're at very best inadequate, but a certificate of authenticity is almost always worthless. When I lecture, I step to the front of the stage, show a certificate to the audience, tear it up in little pieces and throw it up in the air just to show them what it's really worth. My reports are 12 pages long. Mm-hmm. And it's the best guarantee you can get of what you have. And I do a lot of them.
That's amazing. Well, what information can you tell us about the prints that we have here at the Nicolaysen Art Museum?
Well, it's a very interesting assortment because they come from various backgrounds, various locations, and they really represent various portions of Dali's printmaking. I should explain, first of all, that I divide Salvador Dali prints into three categories, and because I do, just about everyone else does too. Category one are those prints that are fully original. And what that means is that the artist, the Salvador Dali, created the image on the printing matrix. That is directly on the printing plate or the block or the stone or whatever actually transfers the image onto the paper. And the image doesn't exist in any other form.
Okay.
Category two, and this is the largest category of all, are a wide variety of reproductions and copies of original Dali artworks, most of which he created with the specific intention of them being made into prints. And a lot of these were done with contracts with publishers. For instance, one of the great publishers, Pierre Argelais, fabulous guy. I would visit him at his chateau south of Paris, and we'd have a great time. Pierre and Dali would be talking, and Pierre would say, why don't we do some illustrations for such and such a book? And Dali would say, fine. So they'd do a contract. Dali would create original paintings or drawings, give them to the publisher, and the publisher would then reproduce them as prints, which Dali would sign. But the original artwork, obviously, is the watercolor, the drawing, whatever Dali had produced. And then category three are the wide range of fakes and forgeries. Mm-hmm. And you know, interestingly enough, those are the ones I enjoy the most because that's where the art detective work comes in. Yeah. And that's what I am more than anything else. I'm an art detective because I look at an artwork and that's where the clues are. I do a lot of research to find out what the clues mean. So those are the three categories. And as I talk about the prints, I will mention which category a particular print falls into.
Okay.
Do you want me to go through them in your
Sure, if you have them in
cartoons?
a category.
Well, I just have them in the order in which you gave them to me.
Oh, perfect.
The first one was American Trotting Horse, and that's from the 1971 set of 6 lithographs called Currier and Ives as interpreted by Salvador Dali. Now, these are photo offsets lithographs of the original mixed media original. So these are category 2. And Dali took, an image from Currier and Ives, and they appear, as you know, at the bottom of his paintings.
Yes.
And he did a painting and then basically collaged the original image to the bottom of it. And those are category 2 because these are reproductions of his original work. It was a fairly small edition. There were only 300 sets that were done, plus a few proofs. Yours, I think, is numbered as part of 250, and that means that it's on Arches paper. And so it fits right into where it should. Those were published by Sidney and Phyllis Lucas in New York.
Okay.
And I used to visit Phyllis Lucas at her print shop at 6 o'clock in the afternoon when she closed up on 2nd Avenue. And I'd go up and tap on the glass, and she would open it up. She'd say, "Oh, that's just what the master used to do. He'd come and tap with his cane. Come in, dear boy." And we'd have a wonderful conversation, and she'd tell me stories about working with Dali and Dali bringing in his ocelots. And so that was great fun. The second one that we have here is the fleurs et fruits, the flowers and the fruits. And this is also from the same set. So everything I've said about the Lucases doing the 300 plus some proofs means that this was just like the Trotting Horses. It's part of that set. And it's based on a Currier and Ives illustration. And that illustration probably was printed in black and white and then hand colored.
Okay.
Chromolithography was the first way of printing color, and I think these were done prior to that. So that's another category 2, fully authentic, fully authorized, signed by the artist, a very, very good reproduction of his original work, but not fully original because the painting would be the original. Right. The first category 1 that we come to, that is a fully original print, is the Marie Curie, or Madame Curie, I think you listed as. And this is from a Medicine and Science suite that was published in 1970 by Jean Schneider of Basel, Switzerland. Schneider did a lot of really legitimate original editions for Dali. This is an even smaller edition. This is 155 plus a few proofs. And it's a standalone print. It is an original dry point, and the color is actually added not by hand, not by someone watercoloring it in, but rather by part of the print being charged with a colored ink while the rest is charged with a black ink. And then
really,
at one time. Now, this is really important because it's listed everywhere as an etching.
Yes.
I think you listed as an etching. Every book you look in, it's an etching. Everywhere you look, the Dali Intaglio prints are listed as etchings. And you know what? They're not. Dali didn't do etchings. Dali learned etching as a kid. And if you've ever done it, it's a pretty laborious process because after you've prepared the plate and you've scratched the design in it and you've put it into the 2% nitric acid bath, and the nitric acid has bitten the lines that will hold the ink, and you take it out and clean it off and you run a proof, you look at it and say, well, that's not exactly what I wanted. So you might go through the process again and possibly again and again. Dali didn't have time for that.
Right.
Dali never had any patience at all. In fact, when I look at something like this, when I'm doing a tour of a museum, for instance, or an exhibition, and I will see the drawings and the dry point prints, I'll show to people, I'll say, look how immediate this is. Look how spontaneous this is. There's no hesitation here. There's no underdrawing. There's no preliminary drawing. I always say the ideas came out of the artist's head, down his arm and right onto the plate. Well, a dry point is done by the artist taking, in this case, Dali would use a diamond point, sometimes a ruby point, and scratching the image into the soft plate, zinc or copper. So it's
Okay.
just like he was drawing on the plate, but he was scratching the lines that would hold the ink when it was printed. So that's the original artwork right there. And he did it very, very quickly. Kind of like Rembrandt. I mean, Rembrandt proved at one point how fast he could prepare a plate because he was having lunch with his friend Jan Six, the former mayor of the town, and they found there was no mustard. So they sent a servant off to get mustard. And Rembrandt bet Herr Six that by the time the servant got back, he could have prepared a plate for a print. And he did.
Wow.
And we know what print that is, but we know how fast it was done. Dali was like that. And of course, those are two of the greatest printmakers of all time. So this is a small edition. It's only an edition of 155. And part of the reason is that after the ink is covering the plate, all the excess ink is wiped off. So the only ink that's left is down in the lines. And that wiping after a while wears down the plate and the little burr that was pushed up when the line was scratched. So this is Dali at his best printmaking. Totally immediate, nothing between the original work and the print that you have there.
Oh, that's
So,
amazing.
and we know, for instance, this is the kind of thing that my research does for me, because as I say, I'm an art detective. We know, for instance, that these were signed in the Hotel Meurice in Paris. And he always stayed in the Alfonso 13th suite, suite 106 and 108. And they'd have the prints in one room and Dali would be sitting in the other room. They carried the prints in for him to sign.
Wow.
One time when he was signing a large number of Divine Comedy prints for the Alboreto family, the collectors I'll talk about next, he was signing away and they were carrying in all these prints. And at one point he threw down his pencil and he said, "No more $5, now $10. They all looked at each other, shrugged, okay. So he picked up the pencil and kept signing.
Wow.
So everything about this print is category 1, fully original. But remember, you know this, and I'd like your members to be reminded that when the image went on the plate, it was the opposite of the way we see it. It was reversed. And so whenever you see something like an etching, any of the intaglio prints, even something like, let's say Whistler's prints along the Thames River, there'll be little signs on all the buildings. Well, he had to do that backwards in the plate. The next thing we come to is something I'm really glad you've got, the next 2 prints, because these are not well known. They're not in the catalogs, because these came from a family in Turin, Italy, Dr. Mara Alboreto and Dr. Giuseppe Alboreto. And it was a very private collection. It turns out it's the largest collection of original Salvador Dali artworks in the world.
Wow.
Now, the Salvador Dali Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida, whose collection I have, of course, appraised 3 times, and where I've lectured and given a lot of tours, is the very, very finest collection of original oil paintings. The Teatro Museo Salvador Dali in Figueres, Spain, the museum that Dali himself set up in his hometown, or the town where he was born, has got all kinds of wild stuff, some good art, but not the best paintings. It's a fabulous place. It's like walking into a happening, really. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience. Dali's house down at Cadaqués doesn't really have any art. The art in the castle of Poubal, these are the 3 Dali museums owned by the Spanish government. The castle at Poubal has got art of a sort, because when Dali bought it for Gala, because she said, "I want my own house where you will come by invitation, written invitation."
Wow.
He walked into the chateau that was in disrepair, and there were these rusting iron radiators against the wall, and he thought they were horrible. So he had them ripped out. Then he came back and painted radiators on the wall.
Amazing.
He also painted a doorway to the garden, which is trompe l'oeil, and it looks like you could open it and step right out. There's a wonderful ceiling painting. So there's art there, but not anything hanging on the wall in frames. So this collection wasn't known to anybody. Well, in 1998, I got a call from a man who introduced himself as the Baron Philippe de Noyer. Baron Philippe de Noyer de l'Echerin, as it turns out. And he was in New York City. And when I was next in New York, I did some dollies for him. It turned out that this was a test. He was actually the agent for the Alboreto family in Turin, Italy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And after they saw my reports, they invited me to Turin to see the collection. And the Baron and the Baroness, Philippe and Ghislaine, were my travel companions. And their instructions were, make sure Bernard doesn't pay for anything. We had a fabulous trip.
I imagine.
Philippe and Ghislaine became very, very close friends. I've traveled a couple of times with them in Europe. I saw them every time I was in New York. They came to my wedding in Colorado. But Philippe was the exclusive North American representative for the Alboreto collection. And Dr. Giuseppe Alboreto had large numbers of prints made from some of his original artworks. That's what you've got. You've got two of those prints of the original artworks that he commissioned Dali to do. Because he commissioned Dali to do a lot of things. And one of the things he did was illustrate the 1001 Nights. Well, luckily, Dali didn't do 1001 paintings.
Right.
Still be doing them. But the first one you have is the Lamp of Aladdin. And I think a couple of these illustrations were not done specifically for the text of the 1001 Nights. I think some of them were projects he was working on otherwise, because this one, for instance, basically has Moors, has Bedouins, has North African desert people in it.
Yes.
But these are small editions. All the prints the Alboretos did were in editions of 195, plus a few proofs. The original paintings were in gouache and sometimes with watercolor or ink added. This original one, and of course I've seen the original paintings, and I have,
right.
and some of it's behind me, massive documentation from the Alboretos of everything, because I saw all their collection, and they had two of their servants detailed to help me. So when they'd bring me a painting, if I wanted it taken out of the frame, they'd take it out of the frame for me. If I said I wanted to see the files, they'd bring me the files. And over the time that I was there, in my 2 visits, and when the Alboretos came to visit me in Santa Fe, and when we met at Cinque Terre in Italy, they would tell all these stories about all the times they'd been with Dali. They'd gone down to Port Yagat and been with Dali and his wife Gala, et cetera, et cetera. And the really important thing is that these stories, whichever member of the family told me, were always identical. I also saw about 350 photographs of them with the Dalis, and the documentation. So all of this showed me that what I was seeing was real. Right. Now that's important because a former secretary of Dali's, who turned out to be a very, very bad man, and held Dali a prisoner the last 9 years of his life.
Really?
Said that all the Alboreto things were fake. And there were some court cases in Europe, which the Alboretos, of course, won. So I was the expert who saw and authenticated all that work. And one of those was the original painting of the Lamp of Aladdin. Another one, of course, was the original painting of what is titled The Blue Elephants, also done for the 1001. And this is in the collection that you're showing. Again, the original is a mixed media. It's watercolor and ink on Arches paper. The size of the edition of prints that they did was 195. And it's not in the catalogs because nobody really knows this collection.
Yeah, I could
So-
not find a lot of information
So
on.
I love it when someone brings me something like this. And as you know, every single day, I prepare professional opinions of authenticity and value for Dali artworks. Now with the prints, we set it up so that I don't have to see the print. I mean, if you've seen, 58,000 of them, your files are better than anybody else's.
Oh, for sure.
And so what people do is they go online, they fill out my form, they send it to me along with a photograph. I call them back. We arrange a time for me to call them with a telephone consultation, and I can tell them absolutely everything about their print at that point. If the news is good and the value is sufficient, then they have the opportunity, if they want, to have me go ahead and write one of those 12-page reports, but they're not committed to that right up front. So when I get prints from the Alboreto collection, I'm delighted, because I know if they go to anybody else, they're not going to learn anything at all.
Right.
And I always tell them stories about the Alboretos. I tell them stories about Dali. I tell them about how Giuseppe had all these prints made of his watercolors because he was a very religious man. And when he was a young man, he wanted to be a priest. And the family said, oh, no. There's no money in that. You can't do that. So he went to dental school. That's how he became doctor.
Okay.
Dental school. He never wanted to be a dentist. He never practiced as a dentist because he met Dr. Mara Alboreto, a physician, and fell in love with her. And they got married. And she was the heir to the Barrio olive oil fortune.
Okay.
So he
Yeah.
didn't have to practice.
No.
And he could buy all the art he wanted. Although in one of the federal prosecutions where I served as expert witness, I was really, really amused to hear one of the defense attorneys representing Giuseppe Alboreto as the dentist to the Pope.
Oh.
I heard all kinds of stuff like that. So I'm very, very pleased that two of these are from the Alboreto collection, because I'm the only person who can tell you absolutely these are authentic Category 2 reproductions of the original prints. Well, Giuseppe was very, very close to the Silesian brothers, which is a monastic order that have their headquarters right there in Turin, or Torino, and they call it the Small Vatican. And he wanted to help the brothers out because he was also acting as their financial advisor. So he had all these prints made of his paintings, and he gave them to the Silesian brothers, and he said, here, you can sell these for years and years and years and have a wonderful source of income for the order. Well, the monks didn't know what to do with them. I mean, the images were totally alien to them.
Right.
And they certainly didn't know anything about the art market, which, as I say in my book, Artful Dodgers, Fraud and Foolishness in the Art Market, is the largest unregulated market on earth. Even the international drug trade has more internal regulation because those guys off each other.
Right.
So the Silesian brothers took all these prints and stuck them into storage. And a few years later, seeing that his scheme wasn't working, Giuseppe bought them all back and put them on the market. And that's why we have these prints today. And that's why Baron Philippe was acting as the representative in selling the prints. Lots and lots of stories about the Alboretos. Wonderful people, dear friends. The next print we come to is quite different, and that is the Homage to Venice. And of course, this is the one that shows San Marco and the Campanella. I was first there when I was 14. And I was up in the Campanella, the bell tower, and I was looking down at the thousands of pigeons in front of San Marco, the Cathedral of St. Mark's. And I heard a creak behind me, and I turned around, and one of the huge bells was starting to move. And I thought, I don't think I want to be up here. So I went all the way down and stood in the piazza while the bells were ringing, and glad I wasn't up there with them. So it's a location I know very, very well. This is looking basically across the piazza, and another location. Dali did do this as an original watercolor. And the original watercolor was a wash and ink and watercolor done in 1979, and an edition of Prince was done. However, that was the 1977 production, and then getting myself mixed up. 1974 was the original painting.
Mhm.
There was then an original edition that was done, and in that, it being a category 2, the signature on the original and the date were reproduced as part of the print.
Okay.
Yours doesn't have that signature and yours doesn't have that date. And that's one of the tip-offs to me that this is from one of the fake editions that were done later by other people. And there were several of them. This one, I think, was probably done at Arts Litho in Paris, and the prints were distributed by a guy named Michael Zabrin. And I ran into Michael Zabrin over and over and over when I was doing the federal prosecutions for the FBI and the Justice Department and the Federal Trade Commission and all of those agencies, because he was the one who was distributing a lot of the fake prints that were being sold by them. So basically, this is a souvenir of the largest art fraud of all time. But the image is totally a Dali image. There's no question about it. It looks exactly like the watercolor does. So the signature on there is a forged signature. Now, that's one of my best and most important stories if you want to hear it.
Yes.
Put you in a bad position. You had to say yes. In the Dali market, everybody says over and over, well, Dali was responsible because he signed his name to thousands and thousands and thousands of blank sheets of paper.
Okay, yes, I've heard that.
Everybody's heard that. And every time I do an interview, I say, please don't publish once again that Dali did that, because it's not true.
Okay.
In 1980, Dali became a recluse. We know now that actually from then until he died in 89, he was being held a prisoner. And that's quite a story in itself. And he had no access to the outside. His dear, dear friends and collectors, the Alboretos, were not allowed to see him. Reynolds and Eleanor Morse, whose collection is now the Salvador Dali Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida, were turned away. They weren't allowed to see him. They went to court to try to get access to him, and that didn't work. Well, during this time, all of these editions of fakes were being published. And people would say, how can you do that? We hear that Dali's very, very sick and he's a recluse and he can't sign his name anymore. And the publishers or the dealers would say, oh, well, he signed this paper for us before he got sick.
Oh.
And that's the myth of the pre-signed paper. Well, I knew that wasn't true. Dali did, under court order, sign some paper at one time because he was settling a lawsuit with a publisher who had sued him when he said, I don't like the way you're doing it. I'm going to walk away from the contract. So he did sign paper from time to time, but not much of it. So my investigation over the years led me to think I knew where it had come from. Now, the book I'm currently writing is titled The Dali Dossiers, Investigations of Endless Art Enigmas. And this story is one of those investigations. I knew that in 1984, a truck had been stopped by the customs officials on the Andorran border between Spain and Andorra, and there were 40,000 blank sheets of paper, BFK Reeves and Arches paper, both of which are manufactured by the Argemarie Paper Company south of Paris. And of course, I'm in touch with them too.
Mm-hmm.
And they had Dali signatures on them. Well, the customs guys didn't care whether the signatures were authentic or not. That wasn't their business. They didn't even think to ask. They just wanted to know who owned the paper. So we knew that this was a large quantity. I also had come across evidence in the federal prosecutions of dealers and publishers selling pre-signed paper to each other. So I put all of this together and I got on a plane and I flew to Barcelona. And I stayed at my favorite hotel there and then rented a car and drove up to Figueres and spent a couple of days at the foundation, the Fundacio Gala Salvador Dali, talking to them, exchanging information. And then I went down to the beautiful little Mediterranean town of Cadaqués, which is where Dali lived as an adult. He lived in a little bay called Port Lligat. And I was looking for a previous secretary of Dali's, Captain John Peter Moore. Dali over the years had 3 secretaries. He never paid any one of them a penny. And all 3 became multimillionaires because when they were there, they were not only the fixers and the gophers and everything else that Dali needed, chauffeurs, etc.
Sure.
They were also the gatekeepers. So Amanda, if you came along and said, I'm a publisher, I want to do a set of prints with Dali, you went through them and paid them 15%.
Okay.
If you said, I'm a collector and I want to buy a Dali, or I want to buy a Dali for the Nicolaisen Museum, you'd go through the current secretary and they'd skim off 15%. And that's how they became multimillionaires. As a matter of fact, Peter Moore stayed in Cadaqués after he was replaced. He built a mansion just around the headland from Dali's house. From Dali's bedroom, you can see the corner of the roof. He died some years ago. His wife died a couple of years ago. But when he was in Cadaqués, he had a museum. And he'd taken over the old casino and put his private collection in there on exhibit. And that was my target. And I knew from having been at the foundation that a couple of months previously, Peter Moore, John Peter Moore, had been convicted of producing and selling fake Salvador Dali artworks. And he didn't go to jail because the justices of the Superior Court decided he was too old and too infirm for jail.
Okay.
But they did levy huge fines against him. And I knew the collection I was just about to see at the Perot Moore Museum, and Perot was the maiden name for his wife, that the Perot Moore Museum was going to be sold 2 months later at auction in Paris. Walked in, looked at the collection, not terribly impressive, a couple nice pieces, a lot of minor pieces. Some of them looked like they'd been picked up off the floor of the studio or taken out of the trash or something. But, you know, an interesting collection, especially for a scholar like myself, because so many of the images fit into patterns and other artworks and things that I knew. Well, then I went looking for Moore. He was always known as Captain John Peter Moore, or the Captain, because he said he had been a captain of British intelligence, MI6, during the war. And that was pretty interesting because MI6 doesn't have captains.
Okay.
But it looks like there was some truth to his having been in British intelligence. But in any case, at the museum, they said he'd gone out for his midday meal. He'd gone out for his comida. So I went around the beautiful little lanes, the alleys of this whitewashed Mediterranean town, stopping in restaurants and tavernas looking for Moore. I finally found him sitting on a stone wall with his hands over his cane, sitting in the sun after lunch. And I walked up and I introduced myself. And he said, I know who you are. And I said, well, I'd like to ask you a couple questions. And he sort of grunted. And I sat down on the wall next to him. And I said, Mr. Moore, in my practice, I have seen many thousands of Salvador Dali prints with pencil signatures that were all identical. And I think that's suspicious because I don't think anybody signs their name exactly the same way every single time. And by the way, I had checked with Georgia Hanna, who was the question documents examiner for the LA County DA's office. And she had shown me evidence that I was quite right, that the forgers practiced over and over and over and over, and then never varied the forged signature from that point on. And I said to Moore, I said, and I've also seen several thousand blank sheets of paper Arches and BFK Reeves paper, not Japon usually, with the same signature on them. And then there's your book, The 768 True Signatures of Salvador Dali. And hang on just a second. Oh, I can't quite reach it, but it's on the bookshelf behind me. And I said, and I think that book has a lot of forged signatures in it too, including every single signature that is purportedly on a Dali print. And I think you did all of those. He turned very slowly and looked at me and he said, "You are not so smart. My wife, Catherine, did some." So I had found the source of all those blank sheets of paper with Dali's signatures on which the forgeries were printed, including the Homage to Venice. Every chance I get when I lecture, I tell that story. It's in my book, Artful Dodgers, Fraud and Foolishness in the Art Market. I always tell that to people who interview me, and the story still gets into the magazine or the newspaper or whatever, that Dali signed thousands and thousands of blank sheets of paper.
Yes.
He didn't. It's just not true. Most of those came from John Peter Moore. There's some other sources also. T.R. Rogers in Los Angeles also produced lots and lots and lots of fake Dali signatures on things. And I mean, you know, if I was a novelist, if I wrote fiction, I couldn't make up better characters than the people in the Dali market.
No.
I mentioned Pierre Argelet, incredible guy, fantastic guy. John Peter Moore, T.R. Rogers. T.R. Rogers lived in Beverly Hills, and he didn't seem to have any source of income. So the police, watching him, you know, buzz around in his, what did he have? He had, you know, these very, very, very expensive foreign sports cars. They thought drugs, he must be into drugs. We're going to keep an eye on him. And when the Federal Trade Commission and the Beverly Hills cops, see, for years I had my own Beverly Hill cop, you know, and this mixed force busted him, and they found out, the cops found out that what he was doing was art forgery. They were just amazed. Oh, it's not drugs after all. It's producing fake art. Anyway, so there were several other sources of those signatures, but the signatures, now I don't use signatures alone to authenticate Dali artworks. Dali did do his signature in several hundred different ways. And for the Alboretos, he created a signature that he used only on their art.
Oh, wow.
And since no one knew their art, over and over in federal court, I had to prove that those signatures were genuine signatures because no one else had ever seen them before. Well, we don't see them on anything else. No, you don't. So I, however, do recognize forged signatures frequently. And I look and say, oh, I know who signed that. Now, the last print that you have is one of my absolute favorites. And in the form in which you have it, one of the most interesting of all. And that's the Category 1 print from the Divine Comedy. The Divine Comedy was, of course, you know, written by Dante Alighieri in the 1400s, and his 700th anniversary of his birth was coming up. And the Italian government wanted to do a special edition of the Divine Comedy. This is their great heroic poem.
Yeah, sure.
Because Dante, of course, was a Florentine, not an Italian, because Italy didn't exist then. He was a Florentine. So the Minister of Culture got a contract with Dali to do 100 illustrations for this special edition. Dali actually did 103, but they used 100. Well, before Dali was through with that, and he got paid right up front, some of the deputies in the Italian parliament And you know how shaky the Italian parliament can be. Governments are always coming and going. Found out that the great Italian epic was going to be illustrated by a Spaniard. And he created a brouhaha. And so the minister said to Dali, just go away, just the whole thing. Well, Dali had already been paid for them. So they took the 103 watercolors and sold them to a publisher in Paris, Joseph Fauré. And Dali was always proud of the fact that he got paid twice for those watercolors.
Yes.
Well, Fauré had over 300 printing plates carved to 3,000, printing plates, because you need a different plate for each color.
Yes.
Print. And everywhere you look, again, the medium is wrong. They're listed as wood blocks or wood engravings, or in some cases, etchings. They're none of those things. The blocks were not wood. The blocks were plastic.
Okay.
The name of the plastic, the commercial name of the plastic was Nebbiolo. And altogether, by the time Joseph Fauré had done 33 sets of the Divine Comedy with 100 prints in each set, and put together this fabulous, very, very, very expensive presentation, he ran out of money. So he sold all of those plates to a company called Les Yeux Clairs, another publisher in Paris, run by Jean Estrade. Jean Estrade, because he had plastic plates, could print forever. And I've been able to track 8,953 sets, each one with 100 prints, of the Divine Comedy.
Whoa.
So they're not rare. There are only two things that make a Divine Comedy print rare. Some of them are signed because some people bought quantities and took them to Dali. The Alboretos took 50 sets because they bought half of the publishing firm of Les Yeux Clairs to publish their prints for the Silesian brothers to stick in storage.
Okay.
And with that, they got 50 sets of Divine Comedy. They took them to the Hotel Meurice, to the Alfonso 13th Suite, and Dali signed them. Abe Lublin in New York, a distributor, had 150 sets signed in colored pencils. And Alex Rosenberg, a publisher in New York, had another 150 sets. Other than that, they're just not signed, except some have forged signatures. So some of the prints are signed, but the best thing of all is what you've got. And that's where Dali did a drawing, a freehand, unique drawing on one of the prints. And yours has a Don Quixote on it. So this is sort of like the creme de la creme of the 8,953 other prints that otherwise are identical.
Uh-huh.
The image is Cerberus, and that illustrates the Inferno. The Divine Comedy is divided into 3 books. Inferno is one of those books, and Canto, or the chant that it illustrates, is Canto 6. Now again, all the information about these prints, wherever you come across it, is wrong.
Okay.
Because the titles are so often wrong. And the prints were not intended to illustrate the canto that they are now associated with. Because when Dali's wife, Gala, delivered the watercolors to Joseph Fauré, the original printer, she got out of the taxi and she stumbled on the sidewalk, dropped the portfolio, and the original watercolors went skittering all across the pavement. And everyone rushed to pick them up and put them back in the portfolio. But they've been out of order ever since. And they were published out of order. And so there are 3 different lists of which image has which title. And some of them are right, but most of them are wrong. This one is Canto 6 of Inferno. It's titled Cerberus, Dog of Hell. Remember, Cerberus was the multi-headed hound that protected the entrance to hell.
Yes.
How do I know what the proper title is for this? Well, aside from the fact that visually it fits, a really, really fine scholar in Hamburg, Germany, named Dr. Everling, Wolfgang Everling, spent 4 years figuring out which image was supposed to illustrate which one of the cantos. He was assisted in that by my splendid partner in Mexico City, Enrique Enrique. And Enrique Zepeda then translated the book into French and into Spanish for further distribution. But so I know that that's what this is. Interestingly enough, over the years, I have been presented for appraisal with several original India ink and watercolor drawings of Cerberus. Every single one was a fake.
Really?
Based on the print that you have. And in each one, the figure of Dante, that little black figure, has moved to different locations. And of course, they don't have an original Dante drawing on the back of them. But this is such an interesting and really, in many ways, a fascinating image that this is what several of the forgers have chosen to reproduce as fake prints. But yours is fully original. It's on BFK Reeves paper. It may carry a watermark. These prints were done 4 to a sheet. So only 1 out of every 4 of the Divine Comedy prints actually shows the watermark BFK Reeves. As I said, the paper is manufactured by the Argent-Marie Paper Company. And the BFK stands for the initials of earlier paper companies that one by one merged or were bought by someone else and eventually were all owned by Argent-Marie. That's what the BFK stands for.
Why do you think that he would have drawn Don Quixote on an Inferno print?
Good question. Good question. He would have done it on anything. I think if someone had taken him into a tattoo shop and shown him how to handle the needle, he would have done a Don Quixote on your back.
Okay.
Dali was always drawing. He was ready to draw anything. So there are probably hundreds and hundreds of napkins that people in restaurants had him inscribed to them, and he'd do a little drawing. And Don Quixote was one of the most common.
Okay.
Also a whirling man, which is just made up of, whirling circles, kind of like a tornado. He had all kinds of things that he would draw, but Don Quixote was one of the images that over and over and over appears in his work. And you can see why, because, that is, the great epic of Spain.
Okay.
And it's really interesting that when Don Quixote was being written, it was being written by basically a clerk who was in a small port gathering supplies for the Spanish Armada. And he wrote the epic at that point. Eventually, one of those ships from the Spanish Armada ended up crashing on the north coast of Ireland at a bay right next to a cottage that I rented for a month for many, many years. And they found some cannons down in there. But there was a man who was imprisoned in the Spanish Civil War who read Don Quixote and loved it, thought Cervantes was just the best writer ever. He finally moved to Mexico, and in Guanajuato, the beautiful little city of Guanajuato, which is an hour away from San Miguel de Allende, where I own a house, he set up the Iconografía de Don Quixote, the Cervantes Museum that has works by 150 artists illustrating Don Quixote in every different way you can imagine. And so you're wondering, what in the middle of Mexico is this Don Quixote, the Cervantes Museum? Well, they of course have a couple of Dali prints there. Had to tell them that one of them was fake. But Don
Yep.
Quixote is just sort of all through the story of Salvador Dali. So Cervantes and Dali were kind of two geniuses that worked in the same image.
Okay. Well, thank you for all that on our prints. That's all fascinating information for us to have.
They are all things from which I can still learn.
Yes, I'm sure in that profession and with Salvador Dali, you are always learning every day still.
Indeed. And if I may, just very, very briefly, anybody seeing this might want to know how to get a hold of me. Is it all right if I tell them how to get a hold of me?
Of course.
Fine. Well, I'm hard to find. I live in a private inn holding within a national park. So I hang out here in the wilderness outside of Santa Fe. But if they have a Dali print and say, oh, I can finally find out if this is a fake or not, they can contact me at bernardewell.com. It's very simple, bernardewell.com. And if they want more stories of this sort and they want to see my book, Artful Dodgers, Fraud and Foolishness in the Art Market, they can simply go to artfuldodgers.us, artfuldodgers.us. And let me show you one more thing, which is not shameful self-promotion. And that is a box, a velvet box that was given to me by the Alboreto family. And this is something for which they are responsible, and that is a cast of the hand of Salvador Dali.
That's amazing.
They did that on the patio at Dali's house at Port Yagat. And they tell the story that they prepared the tray of plaster and they put his hand down in it. But he was talking, and pretty soon his hand came up and he was gesturing with it. And they went, oh no, got a new tray of plaster. It took them 3 attempts to finally get the impression so they could cast that bronze hand. The Salvador Dali Museum in Spain does not have one of those. The Salvador Dali Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida, does not have one of those. So it's pretty special.
That's amazing. That's super special.
Now, if we had the opportunity, I'd be happy to take questions from the audience. But you've been good about the questions you've asked. They've been all the right questions.
Well, I have just a couple more for you, if you don't mind.
I've got 3 more answers.
Okay. Tell us
I have
the
so many
most.
answers a day, you know.
I know. Tell us the most interesting experience you've had pertaining to Salvador Dali.
That's a really, really tough one. I certainly think the experience of pinning down where all those fake signatures was coming from was one of them. Another was visiting Pierre Argelais at his chateau in Melun, south of Paris. I went with the Baron and the Baroness, Philippe Denoyer and Ghislaine Denoyer, a beautiful little French couple, dear, dear people. And they knew Pierre. And so we arrived at the chateau, we went in through the gates and we parked in front of the Orangerie, and we went up the front steps and knocked on the great knocker. And we were greeted at the front door by Jean-Claude, who was Pierre's assistant. Now we knew that Pierre Argelais was 83 years old because we had each received an invitation to his birthday party a few weeks earlier. And he was a photographer, wonderful photographer. He had the gallery Furstenberg in Paris, and he published a lot of really good Dali editions. The invitation to his birthday party had a picture of him lying in a coffin.
Oh my gosh.
It said, come and see if I'm still alive. Well, we didn't. I couldn't. I was there a few weeks late. But so we went in. We were shown into his study, and Marie Claude went down the hall to get the master. We waited a while. After a while, they came back down the hall, and she was pushing a wheelchair. And he was, with all this great white hair and great white beard, was sitting in the wheelchair all bent over, and he had all these blankets and everything on top of him. And Ghislaine leaned over to Philippe and she said, oh, he has sunk very much. And And Philippe said, "Oh, he's tragique." They stopped right in front of us. Suddenly, Pierre jumped up, threw off all the blankets, kicked the wheelchair back down the hall and said, "Not yet." This is my kind of guy.
Yeah.
We really hit it off. We had a great time. Went into the basement of the chateau where he had what he called the Museum of Surrealism, where he had lots and lots of things, including a wax Salvador Dali wearing all the official robes that Dali had created when he was admitted to the French Academy. And there's a painted piano that water would run out of if you turned a tap, and water would run out of the piano, and lots of printing plates. And, you know, I was always looking for the printing plates and the original drawings and all that kind of stuff. And through all the different prosecutions, I saw an enormous amount of that. That's one of the things that put me in the position I'm in, is that if a publisher got arrested and got knocked over, you know, I'd get called by the Federal Trade Commission or the FBI or someone, and then I would go and I'd have absolutely everything available to me, and all the files and the printing plates and everything else. So I think that visit to Pierre and the Museum of Surrealism was wonderful. And he also showed me a lot of 8mm home movies that he had made when Dali was there, because they do all of these happenings with 6 men in livery on horses riding up the grand staircase and along the hall upstairs and down the back stairs, and 20 priests carrying a long stuffed snake around the yard. And my favorite is a short little clip of Salvador Dali dancing the Charleston on the lawn right in front of the Orangerie. Later in the day, we went over to the Fontainebleau Forest, to a wonderful 350-year-old inn with this huge fireplace with all these, you know, these animals turning on spits over the fire and everything. And I think maybe that was one of the special days. There've been a lot of them.
Sounds like it, I'm sure.
But I think that was one of the special days.
Yes. Well, and we are having a Salvador Dali surrealist inspired dinner here at the Nick. And of course, you know that he wrote a cookbook.
Absolutely. Ledine Gala.
Yes. And the wine book as well. Could you give us an idea of what a culinary party with Dali would have been like?
Well, they never really did. I mean, those were never really created by Dali at that time.
Oh, okay.
There have been a couple of attempts since then to reproduce it. There's a contemporary art museum here in Santa Fe that did a dinner where they didn't try to reproduce those fabulous, fabulous designs that Dali did for Ledine de Gala, but using that as sort of a springboard, we had a really wonderful, surreal dinner. Dinner with Dali was always fun. I've always thought I should do a Dali discovery tour to Spain. And I've been there, and, you know, the first time I went, I wanted to know do you see Dali in the landscape? Everywhere.
Really?
And so now I know things like Dali's favorite restaurants, and I can take people around to all the different locations, not just the museums, but other places out on the Cap de Creus, where the great volcanic rocks inspired many, many, many of his rather surreal images. So one of the places I like to go with whoever's with me when I am in Cadaqués is his favorite restaurant. And just the restaurant alone is wonderful, you know, vaulted arches and ceilings and grapes hanging down and all that kind of stuff. And there's the table where Dali would meet with people, and lots of photographs of that. Lots of photographs with different celebrities and such. And they weren't serving the food that you see in Ledine de Gala. That was just total fantasy.
Yeah.
But they were having lots and lots of fun. And the important thing is Dali was probably not drinking any alcohol. Might have a glass of a pink cava, you know, Spanish champagne, but usually not. Because people always ask me, you know, what drugs was he on? He was never on drugs. One time he was in the Rounds living room at their house at Port Lligat with a bunch of hippies, and this great big joint was passed, and he shrank away from it, and he, you know, shook his head no, and he said, "You are all trying to get where I already am. And of course, that
Oh my
famous
God.
quote, I don't do drugs, I am drugged.
Drugs.
And the same is true of alcohol. He hardly ever drank alcohol. But with the bright, the fantastic, the fun people who were there, even though they weren't reproducing the images, the dishes from Le Dîner de Gala, it was a fun party.
Oh, for
And
sure.
I'm sure you're going to have one, because this is the sort of thing that hopefully people will really respond by dressing up in something that, relates to Dali. As you can see, I have a suit covered with mustaches. When we did that dinner here in Santa Fe, I wore this suit. My tie was a plastic red lobster.
Oh, perfect.
And I wore a top hat, which is across the office there, with images of Dali around it. And other people did all kinds of other Dalinian stuff. And it really gives people, permission
Right.
to do something wild. What would
I'm
Dali
hoping
think?
so.
Wouldn't Dali love this? Wouldn't he look at you and say, "Oh, snails in your ears. I didn't think of that." So I really hope that the participants will make an effort to do something Dalinian, which basically means the gloves are off and anything
Right.
is possible.
Yes.
Good for you. I just think it's wonderful that you're doing this, that you're bringing Dali to your city, that you are exposing it, because I deal with people all the time who will say, well, I picked up on Dali when I was in my art history class in college, and I've
Mhm.
loved him ever since, but I don't know much about him. So
Yes.
good for you. And
Well,
good for you
thank you.
contacting me. Hopefully I've been able to share some interesting information too.
Absolutely. Your stories are fascinating, and you clearly definitely know your Dali. So thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Well, all best wishes to you, to the museum. I had a wonderful lunch with your director and his brilliant wife, who's making this all work technically.
Yes.
And I can't wait till I get up that way and visit the museum.
Yes, we would love to have you anytime.
And my compliment to all of your supporters and members.
Thank you so much, Bernard.
Be safe and be well. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.